I used to think intelligence was the kind of thing people could recognize. That if you were smart, it showed itself in obvious ways: grades, vocabulary, the speed at which you answered questions. I thought it announced itself, that it demanded to be seen. I was wrong. Intelligence, I've learned, is often invisible to people who have already decided what it looks like. And if you don't fit a picture, if you're quiet, if you stumble over words when you're anxious, if you need a moment to gather your thoughts, they'll write you off before you've had a chance to prove anything at all. My family wrote me off when I was young. Not cruelly, not with malice. Just with a kind of casual, unthinking dismissal that became the baseline of how they saw me. My older sister, Vanessa, was the smart one. That was simply understood. She spoke quickly, confidently, always had an opinion ready. She got good grades without appearing to struggle. She was sharp-tongued and fast with comebacks. Everyone loved how clever she was. I was the slow one, the quiet one, the one who took too long to answer, who needed things explained twice, who seemed to drift off during conversations. Teachers would give me that patient, pitying look. My parents would sigh and simplify their sentences when talking to me, as if I were much younger than I was. Vanessa would roll her eyes when I asked questions, and eventually I stopped asking. It wasn't that I was stupid. It was that I processed things differently. I needed time to think, to turn ideas over in my mind before I spoke. I saw connections that others didn't, but I couldn't always articulate them quickly. I understood nuance and subtext in ways that often went unnoticed because I didn't perform my understanding. I just held it quietly inside. But none of that mattered. What mattered was how I appeared. And I appeared slow. By the time I was in high school, the family narrative was set. Vanessa was destined for great things. I'd probably be fine. I'd find something. Maybe I'd work in a shop or do something with my hands. My mother said this to a neighbor once within my hearing, and I felt the words settle over me like a blanket I couldn't throw off. Something with my hands. As if my mind wasn't worth mentioning. Vanessa went to a prestigious university. She studied economics, talked about market theory at family dinners, made everyone feel slightly stupid in her presence. She graduated with honors, got a job at a consulting firm, moved into a sleek apartment in the city. My parents glowed with pride. They framed her degree and hung it in the living room. They mentioned her accomplishments to everyone they met. I went to community college. I studied part-time while working in a bookstore. I took courses slowly, carefully, building toward a degree in mathematics. Numbers made sense to me in a way that words sometimes didn't. I could see patterns, relationships, elegant solutions hidden in what looked like chaos. I loved it. But I didn't talk about it much. It didn't seem worth mentioning, not compared to Vanessa's achievements. And no one asked. My parents were supportive in a vague, distant way. They were glad I was doing something. They didn't understand what I was studying or why it mattered. When I tried to explain a particularly beautiful proof I'd worked through, my father would nod politely and change the subject. My mother would smile and say, "That's nice, dear," in the same tone she used when I was 7 and showed her a drawing. Vanessa asked once what I was planning to do with a math degree. I said I wasn't sure yet, maybe teaching, maybe something in research or data analysis. She laughed not meanly, just dismissively, and said, "Well, I guess there's always a need for high school math teachers." As if that were the ceiling of my ambition, the best I could hope for. I didn't argue. I'd learned by then that arguing only made me seem defensive, and defensiveness was read as insecurity, and insecurity confirmed what they already believed about me. So I stayed quiet. The family dynamic calcified over the years. Vanessa was the success. I was the other one. The one who was doing fine in her own way. The one they didn't worry about because their expectations were low enough that I couldn't disappoint them. It hurt, but it was also a strange kind of freedom. I didn't have to perform for them. I could simply work, quietly, toward goals that were mine alone. I finished my undergraduate degree and applied to graduate programs. I didn't tell my family. I wasn't hiding it exactly, I just didn't see the point in mentioning it until I knew whether I'd gotten in. The applications were rigorous, the competition steep. I spent months on my statements, on gathering recommendations, on preparing for interviews. I didn't expect much. I'd been told my whole life, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that I wasn't cut out for anything exceptional. But I got in. not just into one program, into several. Fully funded PhD programs in applied mathematics at universities my family had actually heard of. One of them was the same university Vanessa had attended for undergrad, a place she still spoke about with reverence. I accepted the offer from a different school, a top-tier program known for its work in computational mathematics and algorithm design. The kind of program that led to positions in research labs, tech companies, academic posts. The kind of program people didn't stumble into by accident. I still didn't tell my family right away. I wanted to sit with it for a while, to let it feel real before I exposed it to their reactions, whatever those might be. I moved across the country that summer. I found a small apartment near campus, set up my desk, attended orientation. The other students in my cohort were brilliant, intensely focused, collaborative, generous with their knowledge. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't mistake slowness for stupidity, who valued depth of thought over speed of response. I felt like I could breathe. I called my parents a few weeks into the semester. I told them I started a PhD program. There was a pause. A PhD, my mother said. In what? Mathematics, I said. Another pause. Oh, she said. Well, that's wonderful, sweetheart. We didn't know you were interested in that. I've been studying it for years, I said. Yes, but, well, we didn't realize you were serious about it. This is quite a surprise. My father got on the line. He congratulated me, asked a few polite questions about the program. He didn't sound excited, exactly, more puzzled, as if I'd told him I'd taken up competitive yodeling. He asked if I was sure I could handle it, if the coursework wasn't too advanced. I told him I was managing fine. He said that was good, that I should let them know if I needed anything. Vanessa called a few days later. She'd heard the news from our mother. So you're doing a PhD, she said. That's a big commitment, yes, I said. Are you sure it's the right move? I mean, the job market for academics is pretty terrible, and it's a lot of years to spend on something that might not lead anywhere. I'm aware, I said. I'm just saying, you might want to think about an exit strategy. Not everyone finishes, and even if you do, there's no guarantee you'll find a position. I know, I said. She talked for a while longer, offering advice I hadn't asked for, framing her concern as pragmatism. I listened and said very little. When we hung up, I felt tired. Not hurt exactly, I expected something like this. But tired. The first year of the program was brutal. The coursework was dense, the expectations high. I struggled at times, spent long nights working through problems, attended office hours, asked questions. But I also thrived. I loved the work. I loved the rigor of it, the precision, the way a difficult proof could suddenly open up and reveal its structure. I loved the conversations with my peers, the collaborative problem solving, the quiet satisfaction of understanding something new. I didn't talk to my family much during that time. We exchanged occasional emails, brief phone calls. They asked how school was going, and I said it was going well. They didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer them. By my second year, I'd begun working with an advisor on research that would eventually become my dissertation. It was technical, niche work developing algorithms for optimization problems in network systems. Not the kind of thing that translates easily into casual conversation. But it was important work, the kind that had applications in logistics, communications, infrastructure. The kind that companies and research labs paid attention to. I published my first paper in a peer-reviewed journal midway through my third year. It was a co-author piece, my name second on the list, but it was solid work. My advisor was pleased. She told me I had a strong foundation for my dissertation, that I was on track to finish within 5 years, maybe sooner if things went well. I sent a brief email to my parents letting them know about the publication. My mother replied saying she was proud of me, though I doubted she understood what the paper was about. My father didn't reply. Vanessa sent a message saying, "Congrats on the paper. I'm sure that's a big deal in your field." It was fine. I hadn't expected more. By my fourth year, I was deeply immersed in my research. I'd refined my dissertation topic, expanded my initial findings, and begun work on a second paper that built on the first. My advisor encouraged me to present at conferences, to network, to start thinking about what I wanted to do after graduation. She suggested I apply for postdoctoral positions, consider industry roles if academia didn't appeal. I applied for a few postdocs, more out of due diligence than genuine interest. I was more curious about industry. I liked the idea of working on real-world problems, of seeing my work applied in tangible ways. I started attending recruiting events, talking to representatives from tech companies and research labs. One of those representatives was from a company I'd heard of. Everyone had heard of it. A major tech firm, one of the biggest in the world, known for its work in AI, machine learning, large-scale data systems. They were looking for researchers with expertise in algorithm design and optimization. I submitted my CV, not expecting much. They called me 2 weeks later. They wanted to interview me. The interview process was rigorous, multiple rounds, technical assessments, presentations, meetings with various teams. I was nervous, but I was also prepared. I knew my work inside and out. I could explain it clearly, defend my choices, discuss its implications. The people I met with were sharp, challenging, but also genuinely interested. They asked good questions. I gave good answers. They offered me a position. Not an entry-level role or research scientist position, the kind of role that typically required several years of postdoctoral experience. The salary was significant. The benefits were excellent. The work was exactly what I wanted to be doing. I accepted. I defended my dissertation a few months later. It went smoothly. My committee had minor suggestions, but overall they were satisfied. I was officially Dr. Catherine Hayes. The title felt strange at first, like a coat that didn't quite fit. But I wore it. I didn't make a big announcement to my family. I sent an email letting them know I'd finished, that I'd be starting a job soon. My mother called, congratulatory and warm. She asked what the job was, and I told her. She didn't recognize the company name at first, so I explained. She said it sounded wonderful, that she was so happy for me. Vanessa called later that week. Mom said you finished your degree, she said. Congratulations, thank you, I said. And you're starting a job? What kind of job? A research position, I said. A tech company. Which company? I told her. There was a pause. You're working there, she said. Her tone had shifted, still controlled, but with an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. Yes, I said. Doing what exactly? Algorithm research, optimization systems. It's technical. Another pause. That's a competitive position, she said slowly. Those roles usually require a lot of experience. I have 5 years of research experience, I said. I mean industry experience, real-world experience. They seemed satisfied with my qualifications, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Well, she said finally. That's great. I'm sure you'll do fine. The conversation ended shortly after. I hung up feeling unsettled, though I couldn't pinpoint why. It wasn't that she'd been unkind. It was more that she'd been surprised. As if my success were an anomaly, something unexpected that didn't quite fit her understanding of who I was. I moved to the city where the company was headquartered. I started the job. The work was challenging, engaging, exactly what I'd hoped for. My colleagues were brilliant, collaborative, respectful. I contributed to projects that mattered, that had real impact. I published papers, presented at conferences, built a reputation in my field. And I was happy. Quietly, steadily happy in a way I hadn't been before. I didn't talk to my family much during that first year. We exchanged the usual holiday greetings, the occasional update. I mentioned my work in vague terms when asked, but I didn't elaborate. They didn't press for details. Vanessa, meanwhile, was doing well by all accounts. She'd been promoted at her firm, was managing a team, working on high-profile projects. My parents spoke about her often, her accomplishments, her busy schedule, her impressive career trajectory. I listened and said the appropriate things. It wasn't until the second year of my job that things shifted. I'd been invited to speak at a major industry conference, one of the largest in the field, attended by thousands of researchers, engineers, and executives from around the world. I was giving a keynote talk on some of the work my team had been doing, discussing its implications for future development in machine learning infrastructure. It was a significant honor, especially for someone relatively early in their career. I mentioned it to my mother during one of our calls, offhandedly, because she'd asked what I'd been up to. That sounds impressive, she said. Will it be recorded? I think so, I said. Most of the sessions are streamed. I'd love to watch it, she said. I sent her the link when the time came. I didn't think much of it. I assumed she'd watch a few minutes, lose interest, move on. The content was technical, dense. Not the kind of thing that translates well for a general audience. But she watched the whole thing. And then she sent the link to my father and to Vanessa. My mother called me the day after the conference ended. She sounded different, animated in a way I wasn't used to. "Catherine," she said, "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were working, but I didn't realize what?" I asked. "How important your work is, how knowledgeable you are. The way you spoke at that conference, you sounded like an expert." "I'm an expert," I said quietly. "That's my job. I know. I suppose I didn't understand what that meant. Your father and I watched your talk together. We were so impressed. We kept pausing it to look up the terms you were using, to try to follow along. It was over our heads, honestly, but we could tell it was significant." "Thank you," I said. "And the introduction they gave you, all your credentials, your publications, we didn't know about most of that." "Why didn't you tell us?" "I did tell you," I said. "You just didn't ask for details." There was a silence. "Well," she said, "we're asking now." Vanessa called a few days later. Her tone was careful and measured. "I watched your talk," she said. "Oh," I said. "It was impressive. I didn't realize you were working at that level." "What level did you think I was working at?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "I suppose I thought you were doing academic work, research that was interesting but not necessarily impactful. I didn't realize you were working on things that major companies are implementing." "I've been doing this for years," I said. "I know. I just didn't understand the scope of it." We talked for a while longer. She asked questions about my work, about the company, about my role. I answered, but I kept my responses brief. I wasn't angry exactly, but I also wasn't interested in performing my intelligence for her benefit. She'd had years to ask these questions. She'd chosen not to. The conference had been recorded and uploaded to the company's public channel. It began circulating in certain professional circles. Colleagues reached out to congratulate me. A few journalists contacted me for interviews about the work. A university invited me to give a guest lecture. My name started appearing in industry publications, in articles about emerging research in machine learning systems. My parents began mentioning me more in conversations with their friends. I heard about this secondhand from my mother. She told me, with a kind of shy pride, that she'd shown my conference talk to her book club, that everyone had been so impressed. She said she hadn't realized I was so accomplished, that she wished I'd told her more. I didn't know what to say to that. I told her as much as she'd been willing to hear. Vanessa's attitude shifted gradually. She started calling more often, asking about my work, my projects, my opinions on various topics. She mentioned me to her colleagues, name-dropped the company I worked for in conversations. She suggested we meet up next time I was in her city, said we should catch up properly. It was strange being seen by her for the first time. Not strange in a good way, strange in a hollow way. Because nothing about me had changed. I was the same person I'd always been. The same person she dismissed as slow, as limited, as someone who'd probably end up teaching high school math. The only thing that I'd changed was her perception. And that perception had shifted not because she'd learned to see me differently, but because other people had validated me first. I agreed to meet her for dinner when I was next in town. We sat across from each other in a restaurant she'd chosen, and she asked me about my work with an attentiveness that felt performative. She wanted to understand what I did, she said. She wanted to know more about my field. I answered her questions. I explained what I could in terms she might grasp. She nodded, made impressed noises, told me how proud she was of me. At one point she said, "You know, I always thought you were smart. I just didn't realize how smart." I looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't think I was smart," I said quietly. "You thought I was slow." She blinked. "That's not true," she said. "It is," I said. "You've thought that my entire life. You've said it, in different ways, more times than I can count. I never said you weren't smart. You didn't have to say it directly," I said. "You said it in a way. You laughed when I told you I was studying math. You said it when you asked if I was sure I could handle graduate school. You said it every time you explained something to me like I was a child, every time you dismissed what I was working on as if it couldn't possibly matter." She looked down at her plate. "I didn't mean it that way," she said. "Maybe not," I said. "But that's how it was." We finished the meal in near silence. She paid, insisted on it. We hugged briefly outside the restaurant, and she said we should do this again soon. I said maybe. I didn't hear from her for several weeks after that. My parents, meanwhile, had become newly interested in my life. They asked questions, wanted updates, expressed concern about whether I was working too hard, whether I was taking care of myself. It was the kind of attention I'd wanted as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, trying to prove I was capable of more than they imagined. But now it felt too late. Or not too late exactly, just beside the point. I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd built a life and a career without it. Their approval, offered now, felt like something I was supposed to be grateful for. But mostly I just felt tired. I was invited to join the editorial board of a prominent journal in my field. I accepted. I was asked to serve on a review panel for a major grant program. I agreed. I was promoted at work, given a larger team, more responsibility, a seat at the table for strategic decisions. I continued publishing, speaking, contributing. And my family continued to adjust their narrative about me. I was no longer the slow one, the quiet one, the one they didn't worry about. I was accomplished. Successful. Someone to be proud of. Vanessa sent me a message one evening, months after our dinner. She said she'd been thinking about what I'd said, that she wanted to apologize. She said she hadn't realized how she'd made me feel, that she'd never intended to diminish me, that she was sorry. I read the message several times. I believed that she was sorry. I believed that she hadn't intended harm. But intention and impact are different things, and the impact had shaped my entire life. I replied, thanking her for the apology. I didn't say I forgave her, because I wasn't sure I did. Forgiveness felt like something I was supposed to offer, a gesture that would close the loop and make everyone comfortable. But I didn't feel comfortable. I felt clear-eyed, maybe for the first time. My relationship with my family didn't rupture. It continued, steady and polite, like a river that had worn smooth stones over time. We talked on the phone, exchanged emails, saw each other on holidays. But there was a distance now that hadn't been there before, not a hostile distance, just a realistic one. I understood what they were capable of seeing and what they weren't. I understood that their love for me had always been conditional on their understanding of me, and that understanding had been limited by their assumptions. They loved the version of me they could recognize. And now that I'd become recognizable to them, they could love me more easily. But I didn't need that love the way I once had. I'd learned to see myself clearly, independently of their perception. And that clarity was worth more than their approval. I continued my work. I continued building a life that felt true to who I was. I mentored younger researchers, particularly those who reminded me of myself, quiet, thoughtful, slow to speak but deep in their thinking. I made space for them, encouraged them, saw them in ways I hadn't been seen. And I stopped waiting for my family to understand me. I stopped hoping they'd suddenly recognize who I'd always been. They saw me now in their way, and that was fine. But I didn't need them to rewrite history, to pretend they'd always known I was capable of this. Because the truth was simpler and sadder than that. They hadn't known. They hadn't looked closely enough to see. And by the time they did, I'd already learned to see myself. I think about that sometimes, about how much time I spent trying to be visible to people who weren't looking. About how much energy I expended trying to prove something that shouldn't have needed proving. About how I mistook their blindness for my inadequacy. I don't blame them exactly. They saw what they expected to see. We all do that to some extent. But I also don't absolve them. Because at a certain point, love requires curiosity. It requires the willingness to question your assumptions, to look beyond the surface, to see the person in front of you as they actually are rather than as you've decided they must be. They didn't do that. And I spent years believing their version of me was the truth. It wasn't. The truth was that I'd always been intelligent. I'd always been capable. I'd always had something to contribute. The only thing that changed was that I stopped waiting for permission to believe it. I found that permission in my work, in my colleagues, in the quiet satisfaction of solving problems that mattered. I found it in the moments when I stood in front of an audience and spoke with confidence about things I understood deeply. I found it in the respect of peers who valued what I brought to the table. And eventually, I found it in myself. My family's recognition, when it finally came, was a footnote to that story. It was nice, I suppose, in an abstract way. But it wasn't the climax. It wasn't the moment everything clicked into place. That moment had come years earlier, alone in a library study room, when I'd solved a proof that had been troubling me for weeks. I'd sat back in my chair and felt a quiet, unshakable certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, that I was capable of exactly what I was doing, that I belonged in that space, regardless of whether anyone else understood or acknowledged it. That was the moment I stopped being the person they thought I was and became fully the person I had always been. Everything else was just other people catching up. I'm still in touch with my family. We talk, we visit, we maintain the connection. Vanessa and I have found a kind of equilibrium, not close exactly, but cordial. She's stopped offering unsolicited advice about my career. She asks questions now that seem genuine rather than condescending. She's trying, in her way, and I appreciate that. My parents are proud of me, they say so often now. They tell their friends about my work even though they don't fully understand it. My mother keeps articles about the company I work for, circles my name when it appears in print. My father mentions me at gatherings, tells people I'm doing important research, even though he couldn't explain what that research entails if pressed. It's strange being the daughter they brag about now. For years I was the daughter they explained away, kind, but not academic, sweet, but not sharp. Now I'm the daughter they mention first, the one whose accomplishments anchor their sense of parental success. I don't resent them for it. Not anymore. Resentment requires a kind of ongoing hope that things could have been different, a belief that they should have known better. I've let go of that. They were limited by their own frameworks, their own understanding of intelligence and success. They couldn't see me because I didn't fit their template. But I also don't forget. I remember what it felt like to be invisible in my own family. I remember the loneliness of being misunderstood by the people who were supposed to know me best. I remember the exhaustion of trying to translate myself into a language they would recognize, only to realize they weren't interested in learning. Those memories inform how I move through the world now. They make me careful about assumptions, about the stories I tell about others. They make me curious about the people who don't speak up quickly, who seem to hesitate, who process things slowly. I know now that silence doesn't mean emptiness. That slowness doesn't mean inability. That intelligence takes many forms, and the most valuable forms are often the ones least recognized. I also know that external validation is a trap if you are looking for it in the wrong places. My family's approval, which I'd wanted so desperately for so many years, turned out to be conditional and fragile. It appeared only when I achieved things they could understand and measure. It wasn't based on knowing me, it was based on knowing my resume. Real validation, I learned, comes from doing work that matters to you and doing it well. It comes from the internal sense of alignment between who you are and what you're creating. It comes from the respect of people who understand your field, who can evaluate your contributions meaningfully. And it comes eventually from yourself, from trusting your own judgment, your own perception, your own sense of what you're capable of. I don't think my family will ever fully understand what they missed. I don't think they grasp how profoundly they misjudged me or how much that misjudgment shaped my life. They see me now as someone who exceeded expectations, who surprised them. They don't see that the expectations themselves were the problem. But that's all right. I'm not waiting for them to understand anymore. I'm not waiting for the apology that goes deep enough or the acknowledgement that accounts for all those years of dismissal. I've accepted that they'll live with their version of the story, the version where I was a late bloomer, where my success was unexpected but delightful, where everything worked out fine in the end. I live with a different version. The version where I was always capable, always intelligent, always worth paying attention to. The version where their failure to see me was exactly that, their failure, not mine. I carry both versions now. Theirs, which I understand but don't accept as truth, and mine, which I hold quietly, privately, with a certainty that doesn't require anyone else's agreement. The work I do now feels purposeful in ways that extend beyond my own career. I think about all the other people who have been misread, underestimated, dismissed because they didn't perform their intelligence in recognizable ways. I think about the kids sitting quietly in classrooms, processing slowly, saying little, while everyone assumes they have little to offer. I think about the adults moving through the world, being perpetually underestimated because they don't match the template of what smart is supposed to look like. I can't fix that systemic problem, but I can change how I interact with the people around me. I can make space for different kinds of thinking. I can value depth over speed, reflection over reaction. I can ask questions and then wait patiently for answers that take time to form. And I can continue doing work that matters, building things that last, contributing in ways that ripple outward even if they are not immediately visible. Because that's what intelligence is in the end. Not the performance of cleverness, not the quick comeback or the ready answer. It's the capacity to see patterns, to solve problems, to build understanding over time. It's the willingness to sit with difficulty, to think deeply, to arrive at conclusions through careful reasoning rather than intuition alone. I have that capacity. I've always had it. It took me a long time to claim it for myself, to stop waiting for someone else to grant me permission to be smart. But I don't need permission anymore. I know what I'm capable of. I know what I've built, what I've contributed, what I've achieved. I know the value of my work and the respect of my peers. I know in my own mind, its strengths and its peculiarities, the way it turns over problems until they yield. And I know that I was never the slow one. I was only ever surrounded by people who were too impatient to wait for depth. They see me now. Some of them, anyway. They see the career, the accolades, the tangible markers of success. They see enough to revise their opinion, to fit me into a new category that makes sense to them. But they still don't see all of me. They don't see the years of quiet work, the long nights of study, the patience and persistence it took to build something real. They don't see the cost of being underestimated or the strength it took to keep going despite it. And maybe that's fine. Maybe I don't need them to see all of it. Maybe it's enough that I see it, that I understand my own story, that I've made peace with the gap between who I am and who they thought I was. I'm not looking for revenge. I never was. Revenge would require caring more about their judgment than I do. It would require wanting to prove them wrong, to make them feel ashamed of their assumptions. But I don't want that. I just want to live my life, do my work, and be seen accurately by the people who matter. And if my family can't do that fully, if they can only see the surface of who I am, then I'll maintain a relationship with them that honors that limitation. I'll be kind. I'll be present for the holidays and the phone calls and the occasional visits. I'll answer their questions about my work and share what I'm comfortable sharing. I'll accept their pride, even though it's incomplete. But I won't forget what it took to get here. I won't forget the years of being underestimated, the quiet dismissals, the casual cruelty of low expectations. I won't forget how alone I felt trying to prove something that should never have needed proving. And I won't make others feel that way. That's the real shift, the real consequence of all this. Not that I've become successful, not that I've proven my family wrong, but that I've learned to see people more carefully, more generously, more accurately than I was seen. That's the legacy of being misjudged. You become careful not to misjudge others. You become attuned to the ways people can be invisible in plain sight. You learn to ask questions, to listen deeply, to wait for the answer that takes time to form. You learn that intelligence is not a performance. It's a quiet, patient, persistent thing. And the people who have it are often the ones no one's looking at closely enough to see. If you've ever felt invisible because you didn't match someone else's idea of smart, I hope you know this, that failure to see you is not evidence of your inadequacy. It's evidence of their limited imagination, their narrow definition, their inability to recognize value that doesn't announce itself loudly. You are not required to perform your intelligence for people who have already decided you are lacking. You are not required to translate yourself into a language that makes them comfortable. You are not required to shrink or simplify or rush to meet their expectations. You're allowed to be exactly who you are: thoughtful, deliberate, deep. You're allowed to take your time, to need silence to process things in ways that don't look like what others expect. You're allowed to know what you know, even if no one else recognizes it yet. And eventually, if you keep going, if you trust yourself, if you build something real, you'll find the people who see you clearly. You will find the spaces where your particular kind of intelligence is valued. You'll find work that matters and colleagues who understand. And maybe, if you're lucky, your family will see you too. Maybe they'll revise their understanding, apologize for their assumptions, try to bridge the gap. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll stay where they are, comfortable with their version of you, unable to see beyond the surface. Either way, you'll be fine. Because by then, you'll have learned to see yourself. And that's the only recognition that truly matters.